Most people remember Mount Rushmore as a symbol of American ambition, but few grasp the full reality behind its creation. In 1941, 400 men faced 700 treacherous stairs, dizzying hoists, and dynamite blasts just to carve those giant faces into unforgiving granite. There was no modern safety gear, and no guarantee they would make it home. Something kept these men risking everything on a mountain that could kill with a single misstep. Why did none of them die? To understand the true stakes, we have to start at the climb. Each morning began long before the sun crested the Black Hills. Men arrived at the mountain's base, boots crunching on gravel, eyes fixed on the climb ahead. To reach the granite face, every worker faced 700 wooden stairs winding up through pine and stone. The stairs snaked along cliffs, sometimes slick with frost, sometimes baking under the July sun. Some men counted each step, others just focused on their breath, legs burning by the halfway point. At the summit, a battered time clock waited for them to punch in. Only then did the real work begin. For those who could not manage the climb, a different challenge awaited. A metal cage, little more than a box of steel mesh, hung from cables over the abyss. Workers stepped inside, gripping the bars as the hoist operator cranked the winch by hand. The cage rose and swung, buffeted by mountain winds, creaking as it cleared the treetops. Looking down, men saw nothing but the sharp drop, hundreds of feet to the rocks below. Some closed their eyes. Others stared straight ahead, knuckles white until the cage bumped against the summit ledge. By the time boots hit the top, muscles ached and nerves were already frayed. The mountain demanded this toll every day before a single drill was fired or a hammer swung. There was no shortcut, no elevator, only grit and routine. The climb itself was a test, thinning out those who could not handle the heights or the strain. Yet for nearly 400 men, the mountain's challenge was part of the job. They made the ascent in all weather, through blizzards, thunderstorms, and the relentless 100-degree summers. Each arrival at the summit was a small victory, a quiet moment to catch their breath before facing the wall of granite that waited, unchanged and unmoved, for the next round of human effort. The day's real dangers still lay ahead. But even before the first blast of dynamite, the mountain had already made its presence felt. Dynamite did the heavy lifting on Mount Rushmore. Nearly 90% of the granite, about 400,000 tons, was removed not by hand, but by the careful work of powdermen and drill crews. Each day, teams armed with pneumatic drills bored hundreds of holes straight into the mountain's face. The pattern was precise, a honeycomb grid with holes spaced close together, each one drilled to a depth calculated by the sculptor's measurements. Red paint marks showed where to drill, every spot mapped from scale models by protractors and plumb bobs. Once the grid was finished, powdermen stepped in. They packed each hole with dynamite, cutting sticks to just the right length. Too much, and the blast could shatter the surface beyond repair. Too little, and the rock would barely budge. These men learned to judge the right charge by feel, sometimes within 3 inches of the final design. Twice a day, the mountain cleared out. Workers retreated to safe ground, and the foreman gave the signal. The explosion roared through the valley, sending granite tumbling down the slopes, reshaping the mountain in seconds. After each blast, the air filled with dust and the smell of spent powder. The face of the mountain changed almost overnight. Where solid rock had stood, now there were rough outlines, a nose, a brow, the beginnings of a mouth. The honeycomb pattern left a jagged surface, but it brought the stone within a few inches of the sculptor's plan. What dynamite could not finish, the men would tackle by hand. But the bulk of the work, the sheer mass of granite, fell to the crews who drilled, packed, and blasted with a level of accuracy that left only the finest details for the carvers who came next. Steel cable, 3/8 of an inch thick, stretched from the winch houses at the summit and disappeared over the cliff's edge. Each line carried a single man, suspended in a bosun chair, a narrow wooden seat rigged with leather straps that dug into shoulders and thighs. The chair swayed with every gust, creaked under shifting weight, and left boots dangling hundreds of feet above the debris-strewn slopes. There was no backup line, no safety net, only the steel cable, the harness, and the trust that neither would fail. Every morning, a rigging specialist checked the cables for frays and knots, running calloused hands along the wire before the day's first descent. Once cleared, workers clipped their harnesses to the cable and sat back into the chair, gripping the ropes as the winch operator began to crank. The descent was slow, hand-powered, and nerve-wracking. The mountain face slid past, pockmarked with old blast scars and fresh drill holes. Below, the ground was a blur, far enough away that a dropped hammer might never be seen again. Communication was everything. At the edge, a call boy crouched over the abyss, eyes locked on the men below. His job was to shout instructions to the winch house, relaying each worker's position and pace. If a chair drifted too close to the granite or started spinning in the wind, the call boy's voice cut through the noise, shouting, "Hold or lower slow," and the winch operator responded by tightening or loosening the drum. A single misheard call could mean dragging a man face first against the rock or leaving him stranded in midair. The system was simple, but it demanded absolute focus from everyone involved. Shifts lasted 8 to 10 hours. In that time, workers rarely left their seats. Lunch came in brown paper bags, passed down on ropes or tucked into tool belts. Some men smoked to steady their nerves, flicking ashes into the wind. Others simply stared out at the horizon, the black hills rolling away beneath their feet. The harnesses grew stiff with sweat and dust, and the wooden seats pressed numbness into legs and backs. But there was no relief until the winch hauled them up at day's end, muscles cramping from hours of tension. The rigging itself was a triumph of practical know-how. Anchored deep into the summit's granite, each cable was rated by experience, not by paperwork. Blacksmiths forged the hardware on site, checking each shackle and clip by hand. If a cable groaned or a chair squeaked too loudly, the entire line was inspected before anyone trusted it again. Even so, the margin for error was razor thin. Every man who took the chair understood exactly what hung in the balance: his own life and the lives of those around him. The mountain offered no forgiveness for carelessness. Suspended over the void with nothing but cable and courage, the workers carved history one shift at a time. Mapping the faces of 4 presidents onto a mountain required more than brute force. Precision became the guiding principle once the dynamite had done its work. At the heart of this process stood the pointing method, a system that fused mathematics with artistry and turned granite into recognizable features. In a workshop below the summit, Gutzon Borglum and his team sculpted a detailed model at 1/12 the size of the final monument. Every wrinkle, every fold of a collar, every subtle line in a cheek was measured and mapped. The challenge was to transfer these thousands of points from plaster to stone, scaled up perfectly. To do this, the team built a giant protractor, sometimes called the pointing machine, and mounted it directly onto the mountain. From its center, a long boom stretched out, holding a plumb bob that dangled against the granite face. By swinging the boom and lowering the plumb line, workers could mark exact coordinates one by one on the rock. Each mark was painted in red, a roadmap for what the carvers would bring to life. Chief carver Luigi Del Bianco played a central role in this next phase. Born in Italy and trained in classical sculpture, Del Bianco understood both the language of numbers and the feel of stone beneath his hands. With the protractor's guidance, he and his crew would measure, check, and check again, sometimes hundreds of times for a single feature. A nose on the model, just 5 inches long, became a 30-foot span on the mountain. The smallest error could throw off the proportions, so each measurement was treated with care. Plumb bobs, steel rulers, and chalk lines became as important as hammers and chisels. The final inches of granite, too hard for dynamite, met the hands of the most skilled carvers. Suspended in bosun chairs, They worked from the red marks inward, using pneumatic drills and bumper tools to rough out the forms, then switching to hand chisels for the delicate details. The eyes of Washington, the mustache of Roosevelt, the beard of Lincoln, all emerged one careful stroke at a time. Del Bianco was known for his patience, sometimes spending days refining a single eyelid or the curve of a lip. He guided younger carvers, teaching them to read the model and the mountain at once, to see both the plan and the stone's natural grain. Thousands of individual points, each checked and marked, came together to create the monument's faces. The process demanded not only technical skill, but also trust between men. Trust that the measurements would hold, that the stone would respond, and that hands suspended high above the valley would not falter. The pointing method brought order to the chaos left by dynamite and gave the mountain its human features. It was a blend of calculation and instinct, a conversation between the sculptor's eye and the mountain's silent resistance. In the end, it was this fusion, math and art, plan and improvisation, that allowed the presidents to look out over the Black Hills, their features carved with a precision that defied the scale of the task. Granite dust settled on everything. It coated hair, skin, and clothes, turning sweat to mud and filling mouths with grit. Each swing of a drill sent a new cloud into the air, fine as flour, impossible to escape. Workers tied cloths over their faces, but the masks did little more than catch the biggest chunks. With every breath, tiny shards of stone scraped throats and burrowed deep into lungs. The men coughed through their shifts, spitting gray by lunchtime, knowing the dust would follow them home. Noise was a constant companion. Pneumatic drills and jackhammers hammered at the rock from sunrise to quitting time, their roar echoing across the valley. The sound was more than loud. It was punishing, a physical force that rattled teeth and left ears ringing long after the tools were silent. Some men stuffed cotton in their ears, but most just endured. Years later, many would struggle to hear a conversation across the dinner table, the damage done by thousands of hours beside the drills. Weather in the Black Hills played by its own rules. In summer, the sun baked the granite until it was too hot to touch, and the air shimmered above the pale stone. Temperatures climbed toward 100 degrees, sweat stinging eyes and soaking shirts. Winter brought the opposite. Biting winds that cut through layers, freezing fingers stiff around metal tools. Snowstorms rolled in without warning, covering the mountain in ice and making every surface slick. Lightning storms swept the ridges, forcing men to scramble for cover as thunder cracked overhead. The mountain offered no shelter. Work continued through blizzards and heat waves, the only breaks coming when wind or lightning made it too dangerous to hang from the cables. Even then, there was no relief from the dust. It clung to the inside of noses and throats, a reminder that every breath was a risk. No government agency set rules for their safety. There were no hard hats, no respirators, no ear protection. The only defenses were cloth masks, raw determination, and a willingness to accept whatever the mountain demanded. Each man knew the risks, lungs that might never clear. Hearing that would fade, skin burned and chapped by sun and wind. Yet day after day, they returned to the granite, carving faces that would outlast every hardship the weather and dust could throw at them. Nearly 400 men and boys signed the payroll at Mount Rushmore. Their names fill pages in the park's archives: miners, blacksmiths, drillers, carvers, tram operators, call boys. Some lasted a day, others stayed for years, their hands shaping the mountain through every season from 1927 to 1941. At the project's heart was a staggering feat: 450,000 tons of granite removed, stone by stone, until 4 faces stared out over the hills. That is 800 million pounds, enough rock to fill a fleet of freight trains stretching for miles. Every ton lowered from the cliff meant another risk accepted: dynamite blasts, swinging cables, sudden storms, and the daily gamble of heights. The workforce changed with the times. During the Depression, men lined up for a steady wage, $8 a day, cash that meant survival for families across South Dakota. Some came from mining towns, others from farms lost to drought. The job promised danger, but it also offered pride. Few could claim to have carved a president's eye or shaped the curl of Lincoln's beard. In the final year after Gutzon Borglum's death in March 1941, his son Lincoln stepped in. The site's rhythm hardly paused. Crews pressed on, racing the clock as war loomed and federal funding faded. By October of that year, tools fell silent. The mountain was declared complete, at least for that generation. What stands out, even now, is not just the scale of the monument, but the survival of its makers. 14 years, 400 workers, not a single fatality. No one fell to the rocks below. No one lost to a misfire or snapped cable. The park curator, keeper of the old ledgers and faded photographs, points to this record with quiet awe. Other projects of the era, dams, tunnels, skyscrapers, claimed dozens, sometimes hundreds of lives. At Rushmore, discipline and skill shaped not only the stone, but the outcome for every man who climbed those stairs or braved the cables. The statistics are clear: 0 deaths, despite every reason to expect otherwise. The monument's true legacy is written not only in granite, but in the improbable safety of those who risked everything to build it. Every year, over 2 million people stand before the granite faces, often unaware of the real human risk behind them. In a world where safety regulations now define every project, their feat remains unmatched. 14 years, 400 workers, 0 fatalities. The monument endures, but so does the question: what drives us to attempt the impossible, and at what cost? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below.